Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we dig into some fascinating sources and pull out the key insights just for you, our listener. Today, we're taking a journey really into esoteric Buddhism, specifically through the lens of the amazing Dunhuang manuscripts.
It's an incredible collection.
We've got scholarly analysis, related printed stuff, and the goal here is to give you a really solid grasp of some core esoteric practices from medieval Central Asia. We're talking rituals, teachings, even the objects they used.
Yeah, and hopefully uncovering some real aha moments along the way.
Exactly. So where does the story really kick off, the discovery?
Right. It all starts with finding that library cave at Dunhuang,
Yeah.
around the beginning of the 20th century. And, well, understandably, the first wave of excitement was all about the history.
History and culture, yeah.
Especially concerning Tibet. Things like the old Tibetan annals, learning about pre-Buddhist Tibetan society. That was huge.
Makes sense. But it's interesting, isn't it, how the esoteric Buddhist parts in those big collections, the Pelliot and Stein ones, were maybe overlooked at first?
Definitely. Or at least not fully grasped. I mean, the early cataloging happened when Western scholars were still getting up to speed on Tibetan Tantra.
Okay.
And, maybe the esoteric side of Chinese religions was a bit underestimated back then, too.
Right, right.
But that's really changed in the last, say, few decades. There's been a big shift.
How so?
Well, scholars now have a much deeper understanding of later Tibetan tantric traditions, plus new insights into medieval Chinese beliefs. And that's brought the Dunhuang esoteric materials right into the spotlight.
And this is where people like Samten Karmai come in. His work seems pretty central here.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. Karmai did groundbreaking work connecting Dunhuang manuscripts to the later Rying Ma school that's, one of the oldest Tibetan Buddhist schools.
Connections to things like the Great Perfection, Dogjin.
Exactly. Great Perfection, Mahayoga teachings. He actually found some of the earliest known Great Perfection texts right there in the Dunhuang finds. It really makes you think about the lineage, the continuity.
Wow. And the dating of these texts, that's been revised too, right? Initially thought to be from the Tibetan imperial period?
Yeah, the sort of 786 to 848 window was the initial thought for many. But current research pushes a lot of them later.
Later.
Especially the tantric texts. Many, maybe most, seem to date after Tibetan rule ended there, possibly towards the end of the 10th century.
Okay, fascinating. So let's dive into some specifics. Vajrakalaya, or Phurpa, practices, that's a good example from Dunhuang.
A very good one, yes. There are several Vajrakalaya manuscripts in the collections, and they show clear links to the Rying Ma Yud Bum.
That's the big Nyingma Tantra collection.
That's the one. And there's this one ritual manual, IOL Tib J3313. That's particularly interesting. Large chunks of it also pop up with slight differences in several tantras within that later Nyingma collection.
Like the Frin Lasfun Samtox Pyramid you mentioned in the outline?
Precisely that one. Yeah, the resemblance is strong.
So what does that overlap tell us? Shared sources, maybe?
That's the likely scenario. Either they drew on common sources, or maybe one text actually incorporated parts of the other.
Yeah.
It definitely points to a circulation of these ideas and practices.
And the content of this specific manual, IOL Tib J331.3, what's notable there?
What's really interesting is that a lot of it, especially the bits on recitation and ritual actions, fits better with what later Phurpa commentaries call subsidiary ritual.
Subsidiary, meaning?
Meaning smadless in Tibetan. Think rituals focused on specific goals, like protection, maybe healing, rather than the main practice aimed directly at full enlightenment.
So more practical applications of Phurpa in these early texts.
It seems that way, yeah. And it's curious, while it's all about Phurpa practice, there aren't actually that many instructions telling the practitioner to visualize themselves as Phurpa, the deity. But there is a meditation described during the consecrations where the Phurpa implement the ritual dagger thing is visualized.
As the deity.
As both the deity and the mandala, yeah. The whole cosmic setup.
Got it. Now, there's a specific ritual mentioned, concise, enlightened activity which affects transference into the supreme peace. Sounds important.
It does, doesn't it? The text explains why you do Phurpa practice, basically, to subdue really fierce negative forces that peaceful methods just can't handle.
Okay.
And the preliminaries are pretty standard. Prostrations, generating bodhicitta, the compassionate enlightenment wish.
Right, for all beings.
And a quick deity meditation to start.
And the main ritual itself, the transference into supreme peace.
The core idea is about abiding in the blood drinker's heart. The haruka, the wrathful figure.
Okay.
And this haruka is explicitly linked to primordial wisdom.
Okay.
There are even notes in the manuscript saying the real nature of this Haruka heart Verpa is just pure primordial wisdom, the Dharmadhatu, the basis of everything.
Wow. And then it describes a three kaya consecration. Can you unpack the three kayas for us quickly?
Sure. So the three kayas are like the three bodies or aspects of a Buddha. You've got the Dharma kaya, that's the ultimate truth, emptiness itself. Then the Sambhogga kaya, the body of bliss or radiant light, how enlightened beings appear in pure realms.
Gotcha.
And the Nirmakaya, the emanation body, the physical form a Buddha takes to help us ordinary folks.
So the consecration works with all three levels.
Exactly. It's an early way of showing how emptiness, divine forms, and the practitioner's own transformed state are all linked. It's really fundamental to later Tantra.
How does the ritual actually do that?
Well, the Dharmakaya part is a meditation on emptiness. Pretty straightforward.
Right.
For the Sambhogakaya, you visualize the 5 Buddha families, the main archetypal Buddhas in union with their consorts, all arising from the syllable hu.
Hu, that's still key for Phurpa, right?
Absolutely. And then for the Nirmakaya, you visualize the Phurpa implement itself as the deity. The top part is the wrathful Haruka, the bottom is the three-sided blade.
You mentioned a parallel passage in another text, the Miang Das.
Yeah, chapter 9 of the Miang Das, which means something like passing into nirvana, has a section that's almost identical to this whole consecration part in the Dunhuang Phurpa text.
Line by line.
A lot of it, yeah. Strongly suggests they shared a source. But there are little differences too, slightly different words. For the Dharmakaya bit, some descriptions are longer in the Miang Das, like the Phurpa visualization is more detailed there.
It's like seeing evolution in action, or at least different versions floating around.
Yeah, exactly. And within these consecrations, you also see the 5 seed syllables, hu, o, sva, I, linked to the 5 Buddhas. That's pretty standard in Mayoga texts found at Dunhuang, like the Gyugarbha Tantra, Gudsang Bai Snang Po.
Any variations?
Yeah, sometimes you see HU is used specifically to purify body, speech, and mind.
So how do these syllables fit into the IOL TibJ 331-3 consecration rite?
Okay, so the rite involves visualizing wrathful deities in the cardinal directions. Yamantaka, Hayagriva, Mahabala, all popping at a hue. Then there's a description of a 4-armed deity holding things like an axe, a Vajra Mount Meru, a Klavoga staff, the Phurpa, all symbolizing subduing negativity.
Powerful imagery.
Definitely. And the consecration itself is described as the 5 Buddha families, placing the 5 seed syllables on 5 spots on your body. Then you get the body, speech, mind consecration with Jis at the crown, Olt at the throat, and Shis at the heart.
It sounds incredibly detailed, this visualization. What comes next?
It keeps going. You visualize all the Buddha Sugatas dissolving into the Phurpa, then you dissolve into countless forms of the deity.
Wow.
Then there's an empowerment, making you the lord of body, speech, and mind, complete with specific hand gestures, mudras, and mantras, like Shiva Vajrasattva
Okay.
And it wraps up by asking the Phurpa deity to stay present on a triangular syllable E in front of you, and you burn some black Google incense as an offering.
Quite a process. Okay, let's pivot a bit. Samaya vows, the tantric commitments, and Mayoga. What do the Dunhuang texts tell us?
Another really rich area. The manuscripts show different vow systems, Samaya, being brought into Tibet before the 10th century. One that stands out is a system with 28 vows.
28.
Yeah. It's similar in ways to the vows in the Gyugarbha Tantra, or from Vilasavajra, but it seems to have its own flavor in early Tibet. And what's really fascinating is this same 28 vow system is identical to the one the later Ryangman tradition formalized.
There's that connection again. Dunhuang practices echoing in later traditions. How did these early Mahoga vows compare to even earlier ones, like from the Guya Samaja?
Well, early Guya Samaja vows really stressed respecting the master and keeping things secret, especially if you messed up.
Right.
Later Mahoga Tantras like the Gyugarbha often had more defined lists, like 5 root vows, 10 branch vows. And interestingly, they don't tend to focus on sexual transgression as a major issue, which differs from some earlier tantras.
What about the basic 4 Vajra vows, not killing, lying, stealing illicit sex? Do they show up much in these Mahayoga texts from Dunhuang?
Not that often, actually. Those 4 seem to come from pre-Mahayoga stuff, like the Sarvatata Gadadat Vasagraha. Scholars think they might belong to an older classification system, maybe inner versus outer yoga, and didn't get fully pulled into these developing Mahayoga vow sets.
Interesting. And what about vows around the 5 defiling emotions, desire, anger, etc.?
Ah, yeah, those are important. Dealing with the 5 poisons, desire, hatred, ignorance, pride, jealousy. They appear as branch vows in the Gyugarbha, Vilasavajra, and that Rangma 28 vow system.
Okay.
But it also looks like these vows about the emotions circulate on their own, sometimes framed more broadly within Mahayana Buddhism, suggesting maybe an approach of working with these emotions, not just getting rid of them.
Transforming them, perhaps.
Exactly. And we also find another Mahayoga system in Dunhuang focusing just on 3 root vows: body, speech, and mind. No branch vows mentioned there. Seems so. And then, like we said, the full 28 Samaya system, often grouped into vows of view, practice, and accomplishment. Texts like IOL Tibj 4361 lay these out and even mention 4 conditions tied to your Vajra master and your spiritual siblings, the folks sharing the vows.
It paints a picture of a really dynamic period for defining tantric ethics. Let's move to the Rado Warje Smanziusuzlan. You flagged this as a pretty unique text.
Yeah, Vajrasattva's replies. It's special because it tries to bridge different approaches. It tackles the sometimes quite violent-seeming rituals involving wrathful deities.
Right.
But it does so using philosophical language, talking about epistemology, how we know things, and ontology, the nature of reality.
So trying to find a deeper, maybe less literal meaning behind these intense practices, reconciling them with ideas about innate awareness.
That seems to be the goal. Feels like an early stage, kind of sitting between the more ritual-heavy Mahayoga text and the more, let's say, mind-focused style of later Sims and Sojun.
The outline mentioned that the questions someone asks in the text reveal a lot about contemporary assumptions. What kind of assumptions?
Well, the questions show that practitioners expected to visualize themselves as a deity in a mandala, definitely.
Okay.
And they expected to gain powers, see signs of accomplishment. There's even a reference to a ritual where a wrathful deity tramples a Buddha figure, so they were familiar with pretty intense stuff.
And what did this questioner seem to grasp about Mahayoga concepts?
They understood emanation and absorption in meditation. They saw Vajrasattva as the top deity, almost.
The ultimate.
Yeah. And becoming a Vidyadhara, a knowledge holder, was seen as the highest goal. The questions also hint at the social side: empowerments, offerings, obeying the master, but maybe also some unease about habitual power abuse.
Sounds like a living tradition grappling with its own methods. How did Dula Jim's the one answering respond?
Well, Dipal Yangs really champions Mahayoga as the supreme system, setting it apart from older tantras. But interestingly, the text doesn't mention things like union and liberation, or scrawl practices, or detailed sexual yoga, or that kind of highly symbolic, sometimes erotic language you find in later yogini tantras. Even the word Vajra gets a non-erotic definition. Unproduced, the spontaneously arising expanse of primordial wisdom.
So maybe more philosophical than some later developments.
In some ways.
Yeah.
Dipal Yangs does say conventional practices, rites, mantras are needed for most people to build up the virtuous roots to become a Vidyadhara.
Okay.
But he stresses that ultimate realization, the real deal, is spontaneous, effortless. It comes from understanding emptiness. He also lumps Vajrasattva, Samantabhadra, and Samantabhadra Vajrasattva together, basically saying they're interchangeable concepts for ultimate reality.
And what about meditating on suchness, tathata samadhi? Where does that fit in?
That's presented as a really key early step in Mahayoga. Meditating deeply on emptiness, on the true nature of reality, before you even get into the complex mandala visualizations.
Foundational.
Exactly. And while intertantric substances are mentioned, the emphasis is that real accomplishment comes from insight and meditative stability, not just ritual power.
Yeah.
The great seal lineage holder, the true master, is someone who directly perceives the deity they've cultivated, complete with signs of perfection, clairvoyance, the works.
Shifting gears slightly, funerary rites and the Bardutha scroll, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Dunhuang gives us early glimpses here too.
It does. The Bardutha scroll, its main job is guiding the consciousness through the bardo, the state between death and rebirth.
Right.
And it has this structure. Instructions for the person doing the ritual, written by Karma Glingpa, and then the words the officiant actually says to the deceased person.
And the style is different for those two parts.
Very much so. The instructions for the officiant are pretty impersonal, explanatory. But when the text addresses the deceased, it's very direct, often starts, "Oh, nobly born." It's quite striking. And that direct address style, it's not unique to the later Bardutha scroll. Scholars have found it in earlier Dunhuang texts from the 9th and 10th centuries, too, like one called Layul Dulam Asampa, which guides the dead towards the god realms.
Fascinating to see that continuity. Okay, let's connect this to art, the Narak Dong Sprug cycle and mandalas.
Right. So there's this 100-petaled lotus mandala linked to the Zur temple, Ugpalung. It's been identified as one of the 2 main mandalas for the Rangma Kamaz Narak Dong Sprug cycle.
Which means churner of the depths of hell. Sounds intense.
It does. This cycle came down through the Zur lineage and was later formally compiled at Smin Scrolling Monastery, late 17th, early 18th century.
So the detailed descriptions are later, but the link to the Zur temple suggests it's older.
That's the idea. Now, there are two main versions of this Narak Dong Sprug's mandala. The 100-petaled lotus one is tied to Mahayoga Tantras. There's also a wheel-shaped one linked to An Yoga.
Okay.
Both have blue Vajrasattva and his consort, Vajradhari, right at the center. And interestingly, in the Mahayoga lotus version, the female deities are shown standing beside their male partners.
Beside them, not in union.
Apparently so, which makes you wonder, could some early Thaikas we see, showing blue Vajrasattva with a consort next to him, actually be illustrating these specific rituals?
That's a great question. Did the ritual rules dictate the art, or did artistic styles influence how things were depicted, maybe even influencing the rituals back?
It's the classic chicken and egg, isn't it? Probably a bit of both. Tradition usually says the texts come first, explaining the deity positions. But variations like this make you think it might be more dynamic.
So what else is in this 100-petaled lotus Mahayoga mandala? Who's depicted?
Oh, it's packed. You've got the central couple, Vajrasattva and consort. Then Vajrobhya, Samutabhadra, Buddhas of the three times, Bodhisattvas, offering goddesses, wrathful gatekeepers, sages, Herukas, fierce goddesses called Gauris, even animal-headed Chakinis. A whole universe.
And Dunhuang itself has mandala descriptions.
Oh, yes. There's a manuscript, IOL, tip J318, describing a 108-petaled lotus mandala. It's different from the Narak Dong Sprug's one, but it clearly fits within that broader Raying mandala tradition, morphologically speaking.
What's in that one?
A huge array. Prajaparamita, wisdom personified. Vairocana, deities of means and wisdom. Paramita, goddesses, offering goddesses. Buddhas of the 10 directions. Shairava Arhats, early disciples. Inner bodhisattvas, wrathful deities, great gods, nagas, asura generals, yak generals, even specific arhats like Prudhan.
Sounds like a cosmic directory.
Pretty much. And scholars see links between its layout and the mandala system in the Sarvadrugati Parisadan Tantra, STP, a major text, and even the Mahavyudpati Dictionary. So different traditions seem to be mixing here. And that manuscript even includes a memorandum of the mantras and mudras for the deities. Super helpful.
Wow. And these manuscripts also talk about, well, messing up, transgressions and repentance.
Yeah, definitely. There were passages in the Drymed Bisheg's Jude, which is part of that Narak Dong Sprug's cycle, that are basically confessions.
Confess in what?
Things like going against the spirit of the 28 empowerments, disrespecting the 11 earth goddesses, not treating the first Vajra fruits, the ritual offerings correctly.
Okay.
And also confessing acting against your Vajra brothers and sisters, the people you share vows with. It really shows how serious these commitments, Domchek, were, and that they had ways to purify breaches.
It makes the whole system feel very lived in.
Ah.
Okay, final big topic. Early Buddhist printing found at Dunhuang. This was huge, right?
Absolutely transformative for our understanding. Finding these early printed texts and images, it was incredible. And initially, yeah, people focused on how printing helped spread Buddhism, dissemination.
There's more to it.
Much more. Recent work shows these printed items also had huge symbolic, even talismanic power for people. Woodblock printing started in Tang, China, spread from there.
And they weren't just for reading. You mentioned impressing images in sand.
Exactly. That Tang dynasty practice of pressing printed Buddha images into riverbed sand, that was for protection, for renewal, clearly a ritual use.
What did these early printed things look like?
So scrolls were common, vertical text, sometimes an illustration right at the start. The famous Diamond Sutra from 868, that's the earliest dated complete printed book we have.
And it has that picture at the front.
Yeah, the beautiful woodcut of Buddha teaching Supuri in Jetavana Park.
But there's an even earlier printed scroll found in Korea, the Wugu Jingwang Datoloni.
Yes, found in the Pulguksa Stupa, likely printed before 705, probably in China. It talks all about the benefits of worshipping stupas and reciting its Dharan, the ritual chant.
Benefits like?
Protection, long life, avoiding hell. And it gives instructions for rituals at stupas, washing, fasting, walking around it, making offerings, all highlighting the power of the Dharan to block evil and erase bad karma.
Did those earliest scrolls have pictures?
Apparently not. The very early sutra of the great Dharan of pure light scrolls seemed to be text only. Illustrations came a bit later.
Like that late 10th century scroll from Dunhuang?
Exactly. The Yiki Rolaya Simemi Kwanshan Sheli Balki in Tuor Linijing. That one has scenes of the Buddha and a Brahmin, again stressing the power of stupas and dharans. Later Korean versions even had multiple Buddha images.
And besides scrolls, Dunhuang also had single printed sheets of
Yeah,
deities.
quite a few. Single sheets with Amitabha, Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, and so on, often with little instructions.
For
Right. How to revere the image, what offerings to make, bowing, reciting the deity's name and mantra the Zenyan, often Sanskrit words to get blessings. These seem different from, say, fancy commissioned art, more for personal devotion.
Were there printed dharans too, like just the chant itself?
Yes. Printed Dharan wheels, for instance. There's one from Mahabharatisara dated 980. Even names the donor and the carver. Promise protection and fulfillment of vows.
And what about these dharan sheets with diagrams, deities, symbols, gestures?
Those are fascinating. They seem, based on scriptures, often use the old Siddham script, and it might have even been customizable.
Customizable how?
Well, instructions from some Dharana Sutras tell you how to make an altar and draw or write the Dharan, but also to include specific pictures depending on who's going to wear or use it.
Like different pictures for a child versus a king versus a merchant?
Exactly. Or a monk, warrior, pregnant woman. Even specific goals, like putting it on a pole to stop evil or drawing a 9-headed dragon to make it rain.
Wow.
Though interestingly, the instructions for the rituals around these, beyond cleaning up and making offerings, often seem pretty minimal in the texts we have.
So looking back across everything Frippa writes, Mahayoga vows developing these incredibly detailed mandalas, the Bardo guidance, and now this whole world of early printing. Dunhuang just opens up this incredibly rich view of esoteric Buddhism in Central Asia.
It really does. You see this amazing tapestry woven from these diverse sources, and those aha moments are real. Seeing the threads connecting Dunhuang to later Tibet, understanding the nuances of tantric vows, the layers of meaning in mandalas, the power invested in these printed objects.
It feels like a living, breathing tradition taking shape.
Absolutely. And, even after all this, we've barely dipped our toes in. There's so much more in those manuscripts.
Which leads to a great final thought for you, our listener.
Right. Consider this. We see this clear mix, Indian, Tibetan, Chinese influences, all swirling together in the Dunhuang materials. So the question is, how else might that constant cultural back and forth have shaped esoteric Buddhism, shaped its practices, its beliefs, in ways that maybe aren't even written down in these specific texts?
Something to ponder, how traditions evolve and adapt across time and place, constantly interacting.
Exactly. It's a story that's always unfolding.